Hold up.
Okay, let's start. So I'm guessing that the general consensus is that GDPR is fairly scary. We're looking at a range of about 2 to 3 on that scale. So now that we're looking at that, I'll try and be as detailed as I can, and I'll try and cover as much as possible. What I'm going to say is we're mostly going to be focusing on what I'm talking about as a guide, and that visiting sites such as the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, and looking at the actual articles and recitals of GDPR will very much supplement this area. The way that I'm going to break this talk down is I'm not just going to talk about the regulation, partly because if I just do that, it's going to be absolutely boring and you're probably going to fall asleep. Also, I'm going to try and make it as applicable to your areas as possible, talking about what you need to do, how you're going to do it, and what the impacts of you doing it will be. And also give you enough weight behind it to kind of give you confidence in the sense of why you're going to be doing those actions. I'm also going to break down the area a large amount. And I'll try and create a small addendum at the end of this session, and that will help your business become not only compliant, but also drive the importance of this regulation. To some, this may seem like a bit of an issue, but GDPR to your business is similar to cleaning and organizing and understanding your home. And this regulation is a catalyst to clean house. That's the best way to see it. It will give you the ability to not only take your business to a regulatory standpoint, but it's very much taken it into a proactive world. A lot of individuals, a lot of entities, people, businesses will see this as a bit of a challenge. They'll see it as, why am I doing this? Why is this regulation in place? But it boils down to something called master data management. And when you have a chance to, if you don't know this area already, or you're completely new to data, Google master data management. And the best way I could simplify master data management is one customer throughout your entire organization. It's similar to you opening your phone app and seeing your mortgage data, your bank account, your credit card, anything that you can see. It brings together all elements of your business or all business functions within your enterprise, and then centralizes the customer. And I think it's master data management is very similar to, how can I say, Jeff Bezos' model of customer obsession. And it's one of the most fundamental points that I can say when it comes to building your business. Customer first, master data management comes in towards that. Also, what we're going to be talking about with GDPR is understanding your business and understanding the processes within your business. Data lineage. So when I say data lineage, I'm talking about the data artifact or the data element. And if I break that down further, let's say you capture an email address, the journey of that email address and the enrichment of that email address all the way through your enterprise until you actually get all those different bits, like that first marketing point, all the way till he or she becomes a customer. And then you kind of capture all the address details and the products and services all the way till it filters towards the last process where it goes over to a third party maybe. And so we're going to focus on that. And then after we understand not only the processes and the data lineage and the master data management aspects, we're going to look into using this regulation as a method to create opportunity rather than a hindrance. And we're going to simply break down the difference between merely complying and creating a strong touch point to you, your customers, and all interacting third parties to create an ecosystem of seamlessness So first of all, I'm going to cover a general overview. I'm going to give you a little less regulation and a bit more data. I'm a data person. I like data. Data is fantastic. And we're going to focus on the vision of GDPR. So let's determine, before we even get into the nitty gritty, we're going to focus if you are in scope for GDPR. So at this point, you want to know, do I need to know anything else? I'm going to give you a straight line of scope or in scope, and this risk behind it. So first question you need to ask yourself, is your processes mostly business to business or B2B, or is it business to customer? If you're a business to business and you capture non-natural living person's data, or if it's merely a third-party external entity with employee data or limited non-special categories of data, I'll explain what limited non-special categories of data will be a bit later on. You may classify yourself as low risk, because if you're just capturing an email address from another entity, low risk, okay? However, if you happen to be a bit more B2C, business to customer, then you're probably, looking at different types of data attributes. You're going to look at email address. You may have their personal address. You might capture their IP address, don't know, wherever your small business is. You may capture their healthcare details. You may go to all avenues. And when you start getting into those PII, personal identifiable information aspects, that's when you probably need to be concerned. So if you're B2B, you can probably turn off this right now, go back to whatever you're doing, and then focus on, I don't know, watching football on television. If you're B2C, then you probably should stay on this call a little bit longer. Any questions so far? Let me unmute. How do I unmute this thing? There we go. Everyone's unmuted. Any questions so far before I get into the next stage? All right, brilliant. I like it. Oh, wait, sorry. I may have muted back too fast. There we go. Sorry, someone was about to say something. Hello? Okay, no worries. There we go. So, GDPR question. So I'm going to start with the first question that I received. Before I start giving visibility of some of the artifacts that you're going to be required for May the 25th, which is 20 days away. So the first question I got was, non-Europe people, I just need to know what this is and what do I need to know to protect myself. So this was sent over to me. And what I will do is, I'll deliver you another question. Will individuals be responsible for the data privacy changes or the systems we use? How do we confirm the systems are compliant? So there's two questions there. The first one, I just want to know exactly what GDPR is. And the second question, will individuals be responsible for data privacy changes and the systems we use and the systems our competitors, our third parties use, and how do we know if our systems are compliant? So I'm going to try and answer this question because this question is about 8 different articles all in one, and they're extremely complex. So I'm going to first identify the roles. So we've got 3 main roles. So if you've got a pen and paper, please jot this down. You've got the data subject, you've got the data controller, and you've got the data processor. So a data subject in terms of the GDPR requirement is a natural living person who is sharing data with an entity or a business provisioning or using the data for an activity. So in other words, if you have a business process and you've got an individual, a natural living one, by the way, then you're probably classed as a data subject. In fact, you're not probably, you are classed as a data subject. The controller or data controller now means the natural or legal person, public authority, agency, or other body, which alone or jointly with others determines the purpose and means of the processing of personal data. Bear that in mind. So if you're directly interacting with the data subject, i.e. a natural living person, and you're capturing the data from that person, then you're probably a controller. Data processor, which is the third one. Processor means a natural or legal person, public authority, agency, or other body with processes that processes personal data on behalf of the controller. So if I happen to be Facebook and I have data subjects that are connected to me on Facebook, and then I happen to be a marketing company that captures all my data from Facebook, I'm probably a processor, because the person that interacts with Facebook, so the person that interacts with Facebook is the data subject, therefore making Facebook the controller. So you kind of get that whole aspect of data subject, I'm the person on Facebook, Facebook capturing my details, you marketing directly to me, okay? Based on the data you've captured from Facebook. Now, third parties, all right, now that's another one. So you've got data subject, controller, processor, and third parties. So what's a third party? Well, let's say you happen to have you've interacted with Facebook, you've collected the data from Facebook based on the data subject, and now they've purchased something, and now you want to post that item to that individual. The posting provider would be a third party. So like the Royal Mail or the Postal Service in Canada or something along those lines. Okay, and a third party is an external entity that is used in the life cycle of a data element or provisioning of a service whereby we transmit information to. Now, let's identify what is personal identifiable information. Now, if I'm establishing what PII is, remember that not all PIIs are considered equal. So something that would be deemed extremely sensitive would be things like race, political opinions, religion, philosophical beliefs, trade union memberships, genetic data, biometric data, health data, sexual orientation, ethnicity, data pertaining to a person's sex life. Things that will probably be not so sensitive will be name, address, but they're still classified as sensitive. So in that world, it's kind of like a little bit of not all personal identifiable information is created equally. Some are considered more sensitive than others. Example, criminal history. That is something that is considered extremely sensitive, as well as passport information. Some of that will never apply to you, but if you happen to capture passport information, that is extremely sensitive. All right, so that's kind of very high risk. Now, if I look at what is processing, because this is going to be brought up a fair bit, processing is the transmitting, altering, consulting, backing up, storing, absolutely anything to do with the data. If you are merely capturing that data, you're processing it. If you're consulting it, you're processing it. If you change something on that, you're processing it. So make sure you understand the terms of processing, because as I go through this, you're going to notice that the word processing is brought up a lot. So yeah, so the next question is, why GDPR? And remember, I'm giving you all this background before I even answer the question, so that when I answer the questions above, it's going to give you a bit more insight. So why GDPR? So GDPR is created, or the General Data Protection Regulation was created to make sure that we as living data subjects have the right to protect the processing of our personal data, have the right to move our personal data should we see fit, as well as have the right to protect the data that is available on us. At no point should we ever have anything that is not factual stored in us. We've got something called subject access requests, which allow us to challenge what is stored in us. Okay. Now, is there any questions at the moment? If anybody wants to drop a question into the chat box, I'll give you like 10, 15 seconds just to ping away, and then I'll kind of continue with the flow of the discussion. Okay, is everyone okay with everything said so far? All right, brilliant, fantastic. And remember, there is no such thing as a silly question when it comes to GDPR. I do this for my day jobs, and I work with extremely intelligent, creative individuals, and they ask me questions all the time, and some of them are very tiny, such as, do I need to communicate where the location of my data is being processed, all the way to what is the definition of consent. So don't worry, you can ask me anything. Lead magnets. Now, Stephanie, that is a fantastic question, and I love that question, but I'm going to hold on to that, because when it comes to lead magnets, pixels, and all of that stuff, yeah, totally. I'm going to say yes for now, but there's a caveat behind it, and I'll explain later. But that's a fantastic question. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. Thank you. Now, before I continue on the next section, anything that falls within the processing or use of data outside the EU, example, if an EU citizen is buying a house in New York through a US bank account and is using an Australian-based broker on a UK platform, still counts as in scope for GDPR. So as long as you have an EU citizen or you're processing data based on EU citizens anywhere around the world, you're in scope as well. And yeah, now to get into the nitty gritty of stuff. So there are two areas that need to be defined within GDPR. You've got a precondition and you've also got a post-condition. So what do I need to do before May the 25th? And what needs to be done after May the 25th? How do you maintain what GDPR is creating? Post-preconditions. This is a question that is unique to your own ecosystem, but we're going to cover off Article 7. Please take notes of this. Article 7, which is conditions for consent. Consent is a major thing in GDPR. Article 8, this is my favorite article because it kind of creates a caveat on Article 7, which is conditions applicable to child consent in relation to information society services. So if you've got children in your books, there's a regulation behind that. Then we're going to focus on data subject rights, which is a fantastic way of interacting with your customers, but it also means that you have to have a certain infrastructure in place to cope for those questions. You've got Article 5, which is principles relating to the processing of personal data. In other words, what is the legalities of personal data? What am I legally capturing personal data? Article 6, the lawfulness of processing, and then Article 9, processing of special categories of personal data. So when I was talking about PII data, and I said not all data is created equally, Article 6 and Article 9 is what I was referencing. Okay, so if you want to dive into what I've said in greater detail, then that is what you need to go into. And secondly, if your enterprise happens to capture EU data, then absolutely, especially if non-social media, publicly available data is captured, you have to document it. So as a controller directly interacting with the data subjects, you have to make sure that you understand what your data touch points are. And if you capture publicly available data, you can classify it as being fine. So if you just happen to go on the internet and I've submitted all my details online, then you can use that to your heart's content because it's publicly available and you don't need to do GDPR because as far as you're concerned, it's publicly available. But if you're going through channels where you need to capture consent, then you probably, you definitely need to go through GDPR, okay? All right. So again, I haven't even covered those two questions I asked before, which are, just to remind you, because we've talked quite a lot about a lot of things. So the questions were, I just need to know what this is and what do I need to know to protect myself. So I've kind of given you a bit of insight into that, but I haven't actually answered that question yet. And then the other question was, will individuals be responsible for the data privacy changes or the systems we use? And how do we confirm the systems are compliant? Haven't even captured that yet. So again, keep that in the back of your mind, and I'm still answering that question. So I haven't forgotten. I'm just giving you enough tools in your arsenal to go through with everything. And let me just check something from Stephanie. So Stephanie's asked, do we need their consent for everyone separately, or is it enough to say something like, you agree to the use of your data for further marketing purposes? That's a strong question. Firstly, you have to be able to demonstrate that I've come to that agreement, because that's consent. You can't bundle it with anything. So, and you have to be able to give consent and take away consent easily. So if you're on a website and on that website I have a checkbox, then if I could say that I've checked that checkbox and I've been given enough information and the consent given was clear, in other words, by checking this box, you agree for me to use my data for marketing purposes, you've given me consent. And that means on an individual basis, then you're 100% compliant because you've given the ability to trace that. If you put a pop-up on a website, and I may or may not have seen it, that's probably not consent, because you need to have that interaction there so that you can document it. Secondly, you must be able to take away consent as easy as it was given. So if I suddenly give you consent on Monday, I must be able to remove it on Tuesday if I see fit. So in answer to your question, individually and tracked. All right. Now, as long as you've got consent, you need something else. You need legitimate interest. Okay. So the legitimate interests are, I need to have something in place to demonstrate the lawful basis for processing. So if I'm only, I don't know, providing a service where let's say I'm a chocolate business, I'm selling chocolate, and I am giving you consent, you've given me consent to send you some chocolate. Now, I can't then suddenly start capturing on the website your shoe size, your health, your sexual background, your gender, or anything like that, because there's no reason to capture that data. You have to be able to justify that you captured the minimum viable product, the MVP of data. So if you need to send them chocolate, you probably need their financial information, their credit card details, let's say. You probably need their name, you probably need their address, and that's it. But you shouldn't be capturing anything else. You need legitimate interest. It's also likely you may have to rely on your legitimate interests to support something called the subject access, some of the SARS requests. So example, if I was a bank and I needed to hold your financial information and I needed to hold your address and your name, as long as I've got the consent there and as long as I've got the ability to demonstrate legitimate reasons for capturing that data, then it means that should a subject access request come through, which then says, I would like you to erase my name and I want you to erase my address, because I've got a legitimate interest in that customer and I've made it clear, I could say, no, I don't want you to, I can't erase your address and I can't erase your name because you hold a product and I need those details to maintain that account. So you need legitimate interest and you need to be able to demonstrate it. And then you need the ability to show that the processing is necessary, which in that particular example you've shown. So every single business process, you must be able to do that. So remember what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about capturing a business process, and then I'm also saying what am I capturing, and what am I using that data for? Keep that in the back of your mind, because I'm going to jump back into that. And then I'm also going to start saying, okay, another version of a legitimate interest can be our own interest or the interest of third parties. So if I need to capture, let's say, I don't know, their address, because as a chocolate owner, I'm going to be sending them a parcel. Again, my third party is going to use that address details, and I could justify that I'm using that details so that my postage supplier can deliver the product and or service. So you need to be able to demonstrate that as well. And you need to keep a record of your legitimate interests assessment to help you demonstrate compliance. So again, if I go back to what Stephanie mentioned, consent, you need to be able to demonstrate that you had consent initially. Now I'm going to drop back into consent. So most of the individuals on this call will typically be working with adults, individuals over 18 or 16 in some EU or EEA countries. There's 28 EU countries, by the way, if you want to know that. However, if you're looking at children, and that was referenced earlier, you need to be able to demonstrate that a guardian gave consent. So if you have a market of 16-year-olds, let's say, or under 16-year-olds, you must be able to give consent in the natural language that your market is going to be interacting with. So you need to be able to communicate to those individuals in that language, and you need to be able to show that you've made some form of effort to approach the guardians rather than the child, because children cannot give consent. And also different geographies have different ages. So it may be 16 in the UK, but it might be like 15 somewhere else. So try and balance that out. And if you want to go into a bit more detail, I think Article 7, Article 8 would actually give you an insight on child consent. So if you have children in your books, go to Article 8. All right, so where am I? Fantastic. Okay. Lastly, in terms of consent, make sure your consent forms and T's and C's are intelligible, easily accessible, plain language, concise, and aimed at the demographic that you're using it for. So if you've got a mostly French market and you're based in Ontario or somewhere in the back end of the French area of Canada, and you're doing all your consent in Spanish, you're probably doing it wrong. Try and make sure that you've got all your consent in the language that you're aimed at, and make sure you demonstrate it. Okay. All right, and then I believe this is more Google focused, but make sure you have your privacy policy located on your websites as well. That's a very important ask. Okay. Next step, look at your retention policies. So you shouldn't be holding data forever, and you should be able to demonstrate that you delete records. It's understandable if you have employees that you typically keep data, I think in the UK for up to 60 years. But if you're keeping people on the books that have left your services for 10 years, then that's probably a bit iffy. Typically, I'll stay within 3 years if they're during their lifetime in your services. Let's say 3 years afterwards, or 3 to 5 years would be acceptable. But it's just depending on jurisdiction. I'll say 3 years after, and then you should be okay before you delete the data. Ask why you are processing the data, make it clear. Ask who you are disclosing the data to. You shouldn't be disclosing anybody's data to anybody unless you've been given the consent and unless you've told them that's what you're doing it for and it's for the basis of the processing. You can disclose said data if consent is given and it is legal. But what you can also consider is if you want to repurpose the data that you've collected, you could use things such as pseudo-anonymization techniques to mask that data or change it so that it's not identifiable for the customer. So you can then say, okay, I've got this huge data set. I want to use it for testing purposes, or I want to use it for profiling or something those lines, but you can mask it or anonymize it, remove all the bits of sensitive information, change it. But as long as it's not identifiable or reversible to the customer, then you can repurpose that data for any modeling that you want to do. All right, and then next one, look out for cross-border processing. So if you're capturing data in Canada and then you're processing it in Luxembourg, and then you're dropping it over to the Asia Pacific for some other work, and then it's coming back over to the UK. Make sure you're aware of that. That is a bit of an interesting scenario. You need to make sure you dictate that. Believe it or not, and it's fantastic that we've got 2 Canadians that have jumped onto the call. PIPEDA and GDPR do go hand in hand. Canada is one of the few countries that are considered safe when it comes to data. The United States, not so much, not at all. But Canada, you've got a bit more leeway when interacting with European citizens. And you can actually search for that on the net and it'll give you a bit more insight. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm now going to break it down into different areas. So how do you approach this? How do you, now that you've got all of this in your arsenal, what do you need to do? It's all well and good me telling you all these different articles and going through and saying this is what you need to do. But I haven't actually given you a direction. So first step, you need to consult records of processing, which is Article 30. Again, that's no help. So I'm going to say, first step, what you need to do is go to the GDPR documentation controller template on the ICO website. Just Google it, you'll find it. If not, at the end of this call, I'll try and throw up a link for you. Step 1, download that. Next step, what you have to do is identify, create a column on that sheet and identify the data attributes that you typically capture at each different stage of your business. So let's say name, address, email address, phone numbers. These are the things that you typically capture. All right. So if it's a prospective customer, you just capture email address. If it was just they purchased a service, you'll capture their customer name, you'll capture their address, and you'll capture their finance information. Keep that in the back of your mind. Create a column, do that. Then identify all the special and non-special data attributes within those areas. All right. Then lastly, break down each of your business areas into a business function. So you may be a small unit, but you could then say, okay, my 5-man band team, I've got an HR area, I've got a finance area, I've got a client management area, I've got a reporting area. And then what I want you to do is on that template that's been downloaded, you create each different business function. Then I want you to then go, okay, in HR, what do I do? What does my typical HR do? All right, let me identify a business processing activity, a BAU activity. So I'll typically onboard my employees. So I've got onboard an employee and offboard an employee. Okay, let's say in finance, let's say one of the processing activities is receive payments, sending payments, reconciling payments, filing a report. Identify those business processes. Okay, let's say client management, capture prospective customers, high level, very high level. Let's say the next step is onboarding of a customer, maintenance of a customer account. Notice that I've broken down each business function and I'm now identifying business processes. Okay. Now I've identified the business processes. Let me think. In the onboarding of a particular customer or prospective customer, I only captured, let's say, their email address, and where did I capture that from? What was the upstream process? Well, I was working with Facebook or LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn. Therefore, LinkedIn was the controller. I am the processor. Therefore, I'm going to identify this prospective customer as a group, email address, LinkedIn. I'm the processor. These are the attributes I capture, and yep, fantastic. Because you've captured it from LinkedIn, you know that the consent lays with them. You know that they've got all the individuals have submitted their details. You've identified that. Okay, let's say you've got another avenue. You've got prospective customers from a mailing list. All right. So who owns a mailing list? Well, if it's you, because you've got a website, then you have to document that process and say, I'm the controller. And this is where it gets a bit tricky. You now need to say, okay, where am I storing this data? What data what else am I capturing? Can I demonstrate consent? Yeah. Once you've identified all of that, you'll then end up with an Excel sheet with all the areas of your business, all the business processes, and it'll be able to tell you who was a controller, who was a processor, and where does that end up. Now, why do you want to do that? Well, firstly, as a precondition, you've now identified all data attributes within your domain. You've identified all the business processes. So if you needed to do an inventory or a health check, you now know. Also, you would be able to establish all the products and services based on those business processes. So if you then had a subject access request, in other words, a customer wrote into you and asked you to delete their data, you now know where that potential customer is, what data you've captured and where it's stored, and therefore you can erase or delete or rectify or justify legitimate reasons for not deleting or erasing or challenging the subject access request. Okay, is there any questions around that? Okay, fantastic. All right. So yeah, this is the preconditions. Now I'm going to talk about a bit of the post conditions. Oh, how can we automate this? You won't be able to automate it. I would say you're going to need to just do a bit of a health check and create an Excel sheet that you just maintain and revisit. If you wanted to automate the subject access requests, this is something that is absolutely fantastic, and I'll discuss that in the post conditions because that's absolutely brilliant. There's some concepts around putting together a website which is attached to yours, where an individual can say, okay, what data do you hold on me? And you can create a whole process where it checks a database or a system and then says, this is what we have. and then you can then delete it from there. So there's so many opportunities in terms of automating a subject access request. But in terms of automating the data privacy inventory, that is absolutely, I don't know how that could happen. In big organizations, that would be master data management. It could be artificial intelligence. There's amazing opportunities. Whether we're up to that level on a technology scale, don't know. Yeah, but the other side, the subject access request can definitely be automated. All right, so post conditions. So we talked about preconditions. What on earth happens after what happens after May the 25th? Well, you need to be able to talk about things such as breach. So what you can do is a personal data breach. You need to be prepared for. I'll give you an example of a breach. So one of my good friends has an email address where he receives marketing information. On one particular day, an insurance company made contact with him. And what they ended up doing is they put in his email address into the bar, and they put in 50 other individuals into the same CC bar, meaning that he was exposed, and as well as 50 other people, to other individuals' data. Doesn't sound like a big deal. But when you've sent out an email with 50 other individuals' email addresses in a marketing environment, you've just created a breach. And a breach is a bit of a big deal. And how you deal with that is paramount. So we have to first define a personal data breach means a breach of security leading to the accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, or alteration, unauthorized disclosure of or access to personal data. So you need to be able to have something where you then demonstrate that if a breach occurs, that you can inform the ICO or whatever regulation area of the data subjects that were briefed of that breach. And it also means that breach is not just about losing personal data. It's the fact that you have to make sure that you've demonstrated that you've got something in place where you've had an incident. So even if you've left a USB key with personal data and it's password protected, the mere fact that you've had an incident, you need to be able to cope with that. So you need to look at GDPR in terms of breach. Okay, I've got one more question that has come out. What are my EU customers' individual rights? I would like to know if it changes anything regarding newsletters or trial signups. Can you send email sequences or not? Use their info for ads or retargeting, or using LinkedIn contact info to create target audiences. Basically anything that's related to using personal data. So what this individual's asked is, if I'm using LinkedIn or Facebook, does this affect my business model? Well, no. If you have LinkedIn or Facebook and they are capturing data for you, then you're okay, because as long as they've guaranteed that your data is protected, and they've got consent, and that they've given, the data subject has given the ability for Facebook or LinkedIn to pass their data on to third parties, then you're okay. As long as you use it with the terms and conditions of LinkedIn and Facebook, you can do whatever you need to. Okay. I've got another question. I'd like to know what impact this has on the pixel retargeting. How do we get people to opt in for that? And if they say no, how do we stop the pixel tracking them? Also, is there any impact on cold contacting on LinkedIn? New Facebook regulation requiring pixel websites to inform, as with cookies. It may be worth noting that these laws affect anyone who has EU traffic to the website, not just in the UK. As long as you stick within the guides of LinkedIn and Facebook, you can continue doing what you're doing, and that includes pixels. Okay, I've got one more question from another person. How do we act as a data controller when we are sole traders? Is there a template for a privacy policy and a process for showing how we use store data? Okay, so if you can Google a good privacy policy. There's quite a few. And if you want to demonstrate how you process data, Article 30, records of processing, what I mentioned by creating a DPI. Okay, and then I've got 3 more questions. What best practice do you advise for safely storing client information, and what documentation do you need? If I'm storing client data, I like to make sure that it's completely safe. I'm talking about encryption. I'm talking about not stored in a device that can get stolen or lost. Option, Dropbox, box.net, something which is absolutely protected, and use a fantastic password. The better the password, the more complex and the more times you probably would forget it, the better it is. Using a hosted or cloud environment is fantastic for that. How to handle if there's a request to opt out, cancel, or not share information. Subject access request, you need to deal within 30 days. I would say as long as you're able to either A, automate it via a website, fantastic. If you can't, create an inbox and then tackle that down each day and then manage each request. And also refer back to the DPI, data processing inventory, which I mentioned earlier, and then consult those business functions. So if it happens to be a data subject and it's a client, a customer, and they are using a particular product and or service, you can then identify what system touch points there are based on the process you identified, and then say, you've got these products, you've got these services, therefore I've stored it here. And you could either have your data erased, or I've got the legal basis of processing and I need this, I need the data that has been captured, therefore I can't delete it. But if you do, then if you do want your data erased, then we would have to cease the relationship. So the DPI would be able to solve that for you. How to run lead ads and complying. Is there a way of double opt-in from lead ads? Well, that one's a bit more straightforward. If your ads are from Facebook and they've processed the data and they're acting on that data for you, then it's not for you to worry about, it's for Facebook to worry about, because they're the ones that are targeting and you're just merely paying them for the service, so you don't need to worry about that. Facebook has to deal with that. All right, that's me. I've captured quite a bit, or gone through quite a bit. I'm going to give you a straightforward action. Go to the ICO website, download that template, identify your business functions. After you've identified your business functions, identify the business processes within there, then identify all the different attributes that are in there. Make sure you capture all the products and services. Determine what the data subject is classified in each area. So is it a customer? Is it a prospective customer? Is it an employee? Is it a third party? If it's a consultant, just capture that. You don't need to go into like an entirely granular level of individual. Bucket them. Bucket every single area. Once you've identified those processes all the way up to the different types, then establish if you've got legitimate reasons to capture that data. Consult that. Look at your business process and say, have in the capturing of a customer, do I demonstrate that I have given them T's and C's and a data processing inventory, data privacy agreement, DPA, not a DPI, acronyms. Does this business process that I've identified have a legitimate interest, and is it lawful? Tick, 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 tick. Yep, fantastic. Do the DPI and you should be on the first step. And then start looking at your different documents. Make sure you've got your privacy notice on your website. Make sure you know who is controller and processor. I've explained it. Controller meaning interacting directly with the data subject. Processor meaning directly interacting with the data controller. And then once you have that, you should be on a good point. I might do a second video detailing those core legal aspects if there's enough interest. But overall, this is your what do I do now and how do I get started video. Is there any questions that you can chuck at me while I'm on the call still? And before I give it a close, you've got about 4 minutes to ask me anything you like to do with GDPR. Feel free to type it in the box, or merely I'm going to unmute everybody. And if you've got a Canadian accent, I need to hear that because I like Canadian accents. They're amazing. All right, everyone's unmuted. All right, I'm going to close the call. Guys, thank you for joining. It's been great that you've given me the time to talk. I don't normally talk. I'm a business data analyst during the day, so I'm the guy that hides behind the keyboard doing the data stuff. So when I get to speak to people, it's amazing. Thank you. I hope you have an amazing day, and all you guys out in Canada, have a great one. And yeah, see you later. Thank you.